The political drama here in South Korea continues to unfold as the deadline for the arrest warrant issued for President Yoon Suk Yeol looms near, while public protests both in support and in opposition of the detainment persist. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Press Perspective for this first Monday of the new year, January 6th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Now today, our panel of foreign press members touch upon some of the latest developments on the local political front with regard to President Yoon Suk Yeol's brief imposition of martial law early last month, as well as on the investigation into the tragic crash of a Jeju Air plane at Muan International Airport late last month. For more on this, I have Andres Sanchez Braun with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Andres, welcome back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure being here.
Right. We also have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia live on the line. Steven, it's good to have you on.
Nice to be here.
Right. Steven, we'll start with you. The second pre-trial hearing at the Constitutional Court took place last week, I believe. How did that hearing go?
It was a more detailed and a longer hearing than the one that preceded it. Yoon's defense team seemed to have prepared more and have to have advanced in some more detail their position that the charge of insurrection is not apt in this case. I think the main takeaway for viewers from it is that there are now 8 justices on the bench as opposed to 6. So that changes the dynamic a bit as the Constitutional Court eventually rules on whether to uphold or reject Yoon's impeachment. I believe, though, according to the system, the way that it would have worked before is that if there were only 6, they would have had to vote unanimously for the charge of impeachment to be upheld. But there's now a little bit more room for disagreement. So it's a step toward this process taking place more in earnest.
Right, and speaking of that process, Andres, the impeachment trial itself, it's scheduled to start on the 14th of January. That, I believe, is next Tuesday. What can we expect in terms of the proceedings ahead and, of course, their pace?
Yes, actually, so next Tuesday, January 14th, is the date set for the first formal hearing. The next one will take place on Thursday, that's the 16th. And then the week after that, we'll have 2 other hearings on the 21st and the 23rd of January. Then the next week, because of the Seoul holiday, there will be no hearings. And there's one final date for the final hearing, which is February 4th. Now, experts have pointed out that this setting seems to be quite rushed, some have said, especially if we take into account that there's a Seoul holiday in the middle. But they're basically trying to go through all the hearings in barely 3 weeks. So some pundits have actually pointed out, like, it seems like the justices here seem to want to reach a verdict maybe as early as February, which would point out to the fact that they already see that there could be a clear violation of the Constitution by President Yoon on declaring the martial law, of course. But then again, this is all speculation. One important thing, though, was the fact that the National Assembly's Impeachment Investigation Committee, which kind of acts like, we would say, like the prosecutor in this political trial, because, of course, the National Assembly was the organ that impeached President Trump and then sent the approved motion to the Constitutional Court. Well, this investigation committee said on Friday on the second preparation hearing that they were gonna drop the charge for insurrection on President Yoon. And because they have come to the conclusion that would make it easier to place the focus on the fact that President Yoon violated the Constitution. Of course, President Yoon's lawyers and the ruling party have decried this decision, saying like, well, if apparently there is no insurrection, which is what, this motion originally was filed for in the National Assembly. There's a technicality here going on. This is not consistent. We should actually go back and file another motion in the National Assembly, et cetera, et cetera. Of course. Then again, what's going to happen, we don't really know. The 8 justices, as Steve pointed out, it's the first time that actually the 8 justices of the Constitutional Court are going to get together since interim President Choi Sang-mok ratified these other 2 justices. They're supposed to discuss if the insurrection charges are going to be dropped or not. So we will have to wait and see what happens with this. Also, the focus for these hearings, will President Yoon actually attend? His legal team has said that he will attend court when he finds it appropriate, hinting maybe at the fact that he will actually attend this first hearing on Tuesday. But then technically he's supposed to be attending, but I think that the court, if he decides to skip 2 hearings in a row, proceedings will just continue without him being present in the court. But again, we shall see about this once the trial formally starts next Tuesday.
Right, indeed. And meanwhile, Stephen, beyond the Constitutional Court, attempts to arrest the president have led to tense confrontations between his security officials and authorities seeking to detain him. This was back last Friday. What appears to be the focus of foreign media coverage with regard to the arrest warrant issued against President Yoon Suk Yeol, Stephen?
I think a lot of foreign media coverage is kind of using this scenario as a vehicle to illustrate the kind of political division in Korea. I mean, we have some kind of pretty starkly contrasting images. If you remember December 14th and earlier in December, we had these quite raucous crowds outside the National Assembly chanting and dancing while they were calling for Yoon to be impeached. And then that happened, and it seemed as though the nation's politics were moving in a certain direction. Poll data was definitely demonstrating that a large majority of South Koreans were in favor of removing Yoon from office. But here we are a few weeks later, and we're seeing on the streets of the same city a very determined effort by some pretty large numbers of people to prevent Yoon from being arrested and to prevent Yoon from being removed from office. And they've got a lot of pretty striking theories as to why this is necessary. I was there in Yongsan district on Thursday, and I talked to a bunch of people, and I talked to the people who were brandishing a lot of kind of American imagery, U.S. flags, and signs with the slogan "Stop the Steal." And they had these theories about how Yoon's decision to attempt martial law was entirely legitimate because it was the only way that he could prevent the country from being taken over by these anti-state forces, that's the word that they used, who are aligned with North Korea and China and who wish to dissolve the alliance with the U.S. and withdraw U.S. troops. I mean, to be very clear, I'm not saying these are things that I believe. I'm saying that these are things that I heard on the scene. And so for foreign media coverage, this all provides a really kind of compelling framework to tell the political story of the country. And looking ahead, what this all means is that there is a real kind of protracted standoff, and that you have these kind of hardening ends of the spectrum who see the whole scenario very differently. And what we know from political history, what we know from the examples of other countries, is when you are operating in a political landscape where you do not have a shared set of facts, where you have competing factions and competing parties who, not only disagree in their opinions, not only disagree in their interpretations of things, but like have very different factual understandings of how they see things in their country as taking place. That is a scenario that really lends itself to conflict and to gridlock. And so as a foreign journalist myself, and as somebody who has read a lot of the coverage, I think that's kind of the bigger takeaway from the quite tense scenes that we saw on the streets in recent days.
Right, and before we return to those streets, Andres, apart from the opposition to the arrest as well as the support for that we see on the streets among people, there is also quite a bit of debate regarding this arrest warrant at the parliament, with opposition lawmakers and ruling party lawmakers arguing. Now, the ruling party claims that the arrest warrant itself is an abuse of power, while the opposition party claims that it's in accordance with the law. What have you been hearing?
Well, I mean, what's happening here is, again, the ruling party, just like Yoon's legal team is defending, state that technically it's not the anti-corruption body, the CIO, who is supposed to obtain a warrant to arrest President Yoon Suk Yeol on insurrection charges. Technically, only the prosecutor's office is allowed to obtain a warrant to arrest someone on insurrection charges. So obviously, the Democratic Party, the opposition, considers this to be completely legal. But, you know, we should not overlook the fact that there's a split between the CIO and the prosecutor's office. And this obviously stems back to the days when Yoon Suk Yeol was actually the prosecutor general in this country. As we remember, what happened was that after Yoon Suk Yeol forced ex-Justice Minister Cho Kuk to step down because of corruption charges, the person who took over the Justice Ministry, Chu Mi-ae, went on to create this new agency, the CIO, to strip the prosecution from some investigative powers, of course. So we already have that split there. And the fact that in the eyes of the DP, the CIO, this anti-corruption office, is a perfectly legal body, whereas the PPP regards it as some sort of illegal remnant from the so-called Moon Jae-in regime, right? What we've seen today is basically that 30 lawmakers of the ruling party of the PPP did go to the Yeongsan district, the Hanam neighborhood where the presidential residence is, and protested once again, claiming that this order is illegal. But again, we really don't know what's going to happen. Is the order going to be executed? So far, what we know is that it's expiring in the next few hours, and that maybe the court that issue it will extend its validity. We still don't know.
Right, we don't. Meanwhile, Stephen, back on the streets now, as you mentioned, we have two groups of people, one in support of the president and another against the president. You spoke of being there last week to cover the protests. What appeared to be the stances of these two big groups? Walk us through them. How are they different?
How are they different? Well, that's easy. To asking how they are the same would be a much more difficult question to answer. I mean, before I answer that in any more detail, I just want to say I'm going to refer to poll data because, like, it's hard to manage to guess what the population as a whole looks like when you just look at the size of protesters. So I'm just going to say that in recent weeks there were polls that showed around 70% of the South Korean public were in favor of impeachment. So there were these big crowds near Yoon's residence, but let's not I think we need to be careful not to overstate just how much they represent the South Korean population as a whole. They had some theories that I think are not wholly substantiated. They talk a lot about electoral fraud. They believe that the local elections that were held in South Korea in April last year were not free and not fair, and there was some rigging. There was involvement by North Korean hackers. They believe that the Lee Jae-myung, the leader of the main opposition party, is a North Korean spy. Again, these are not things that I believe. These are things that I was told on the streets. And just earlier today, I attended a press conference by Pastor Jung Kwang-hoon, who is a quite vocal part of this movement, and I spoke with him, and he shared his views and kind of the views of his movement. He's been leading protests like this in Gwanghwamun Square on Saturdays in Seoul for several years now, dating back to the administration of liberal leader Moon Jae-in. And then on the other side of the protest spectrum, you have a lot of folks who just really want to see Yoon removed from office. These were probably folks who were not fond of him even before all this happened. Yoon has had quite low approval ratings throughout his term. But when you talk to them, the way that they explain their opposition to Yoon, the way that they explain why he needs to be removed from office, is they described him as having quite seriously broken constitutional laws and democratic principles. They mentioned that he sent soldiers to the National Assembly, and they mentioned that when he attempted to instill martial law, he did not alert the National Assembly as he's legally and constitutionally required to do. Those criticisms are not, I have not heard compelling or thorough rebuttals to them from the side that is supporting him, from the side that believes that he should be able to stay in office. So as I referred to earlier, I mean, the kind of bigger and potentially more troubling aspect of this is that you have competing narratives in this country's politics that have quite starkly different understandings of how things have played out factually, not just different assessments or different opinions on how things can go. So I do foresee the potential of some deeper conflict going ahead. I mean, if the Constitutional Court does rule to remove Yoon from office, I mean, I do wonder what kind of response that might engender. And if this part of the population, we're not sure how big they are, if they refuse to accept this, or if that leads them to conclude that the nation's politics as a whole is somehow illegitimate or based on something other than a real constitutional order, what might that portend for the future? Could we see a deeper and more antagonistic political culture, I wonder?
Right, it's looking quite grim ahead then. Moving forward, Andres, what's the latest with regard to investigations over the deadly plane crash at Muan International Airport?
Well, these past few days, what we did learn was that the two black boxes that were recovered, aircrafts normally carry two different black boxes. Both were recovered, as we know. One of them, the CVR, the cabin voice recorder, which basically records everything that goes, that takes place, or every sound that is produced inside the cockpit, that is the pilot and co-pilot talking, or talking also with cabin crew, as well as the communications going on with air traffic control, are recorded, and it's a maximum of, it basically covers the 2 last hours, the 2 last operational hours of an aircraft before it crashes. That was retrieved. It was in a good state, and we know that the authorities have been able to fully transcript everything, and the transcript already exists, but they've also pointed out that we will not know the content until the investigation is over. The other device, the flight data recorder, the FDR, on the other hand, was partially damaged. So authorities in South Korea decided that it was better to send it to the US in order to fully decode its contents. Now, this is all basically hard data. This recorder basically stores all the technical data that all the cockpit apparatuses are recording in the moment previous to the accident. On top of that, the team that is formed by South Korean investigators, also people from the federal office that investigates transport accidents in the U.S. and Boeing, the manufacturer of the aircraft, have been doing on-ground investigation these past few days, and they were focusing on one hand on this famous mound or fence that the airplane crashed against, and also focusing on the communication between the pilot and air traffic control in Muan International Airport. And we know that they've talked to the people that actually talked with the Jeju Air flight. But again, they won't share the contents of that interrogation until the full investigation is over. And of course, as far as we know, there is no still known cause for the accident. There's some suspected factors there, but nothing that we probably won't know until this is over, and it might take many months because of one of the things is this other flight recorder that will take many months to decode, unfortunately.
Right, the flight data recorder you were saying.
Exactly.
Stephen, do we know any more about the victims of this tragedy?
We don't know very much about on a individual level, but I mean, what we do know is that, I mean, some heartbreaking stories are coming out. It's useful to keep in mind that this Bangkok, Thailand more generally, is a popular tourist destination for South Koreans. And South Koreans who are flying there over the Christmas season on a budget airline are presumably families who have saved up and who had really been looking forward to this, to have some recreational time in a warm and pleasant setting. And it's really tragic that their trip ended in this way. Some local international media have reported on some, very sad stories about there being cases of 3 generations of the same family, parents and their children who were on their first international trip together, all kinds of very tear-jerking stories that we can all relate to, anyone who's ever traveled with their family, which is most people. Perhaps with time, some more of these family members will want to speak out and will kind of want the world to know who their loved ones were and what they valued, and just how big of a loss this plane crash has created in the lives of so many people. Another particularly tragic part of it is just how few survivors there were. As far as I know, the 2 survivors have not spoken out publicly. Hopefully they are recovering, and hopefully they will eventually get to a place where they feel as though they can publicly share what this has meant to them. But in the aftermath, really all we can do is have a very hard look at the systems of aviation safety and do everything possible to make sure that nothing like this happens again.
Right, for sure, Stephen, for sure. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Stephen, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Andres, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow, so do join us then.